Thank you all for being here. Today we're going to talk about the making of ngrok. So we're kind of going to go over the history of it, why I built it, and as well as lessons that I've learned over the past couple years building this product and how that went. Cool. I think everyone's kind of filtering in. So let's do it. This is the birth of ngrok, the name at least. This is more than 2 years ago. I can't begin to tell you how excited I was to find a 5-letter pronounceable .com available. This is maybe one of the high points. So yeah, there isn't anything there yet, but there will be. So actually, hands up, how many of you have used ngrok? Wow, that's pretty good. All right. So we're going to go over a very quick primer on what ngrok is and why you want to use it for those of you who haven't touched it before. And to do that, we're going to go back in time to start with to circa 2000. You had just gotten your cable modem to hook you up to broadband internet. It was a very new thing. And at some point, you actually got another computer. And you called your cable company and you said, I have 2 computers. I want to hook them both up to the internet. How do I do that? And they said, well, you can't. And so what people did was they actually adopted a technology to solve this problem. And the reason the ISPs wouldn't give you basically another way to connect another computer to the internet is that we only have so many IPv4 addresses. There are only so many of them, and they are rationed out, essentially, at this point by the organizations that oversee the internet. And so you were allocated 1. Businesses were allocated so many, but they always had more devices than they needed, than they had addresses for. So we adopted a technology that you run in every router that you put in every business, in every home system, called the NAT, which is the Network Address Translation Layer. NAT is not standardized. There's no RFC for it. It was never formalized. It was deployed unilaterally because it solved this problem of I want to connect multiple devices to the internet when I only have so many addresses. And it cost something very important. When the internet was conceived, it was conceived with the idea of end-to-end connectivity, that every device that you connected to the internet had an address that was global, right? And when you had an address, anyone else in the world who had a device connected to the internet could talk to that address and address that machine. When we unilaterally deployed NAT, we broke the internet. We broke that fundamental model of how the internet was supposed to work. And what it means for you today is that it means that when you build Twilio applications are built on the concept of webhooks, of your service needs to receive a notification when there's an incoming phone call. It means that when you develop on those services, you can't actually receive that webhook because your computer, this laptop that is on the conference internet, doesn't have a public IP address. And so that's kind of the primer on why ngrok was built. So ngrok is a solution that solves that problem by essentially providing a secure tunnel that allows you to receive webhooks even when your laptop is behind a firewall. It's behind a NAT that doesn't allow incoming communications. It doesn't have a real public address. I didn't actually build it to solve that problem, though, believe it or not. I actually built it to learn Go. I also kind of wanted just to build an open source project to have kind of a public resume. And then I guess the third priority was make webhook development easier. But that actually wasn't why I built it. This is me talking with the creator of Local Tunnel, which was the application that I ported to Go. Local Tunnel solved this problem originally. And I took that and was like, hey, I want to port it to Go, just to learn Go. Porting an application, this is one of the things that I learned, porting an application is a really, really good way to learn a new language. when you're learning a new language, if you want to build a project in a new language, you're faced with like these questions of like, what do I build? And then when you decide what you're going to build, you have this question of like, do I add this feature? Oh, this would be really cool. I could build that too. How is this going to make money? Do I even want it to make money? You have all of these like weird questions when you're trying to, and the only thing that you really wanted to do was learn a new technology. And by porting something, you restrict the entire scope of that problem and say, actually, I'm going to build this one thing that already exists. The entire scope is already taken care of me. It's very much like a school or academic project in that sense, where all of the requirements are laid down for you, and you even have like a way to judge whether you've met them, right? Where you can take the existing application and say, how does it handle this? Does it do that? Okay, like I got it right. It also gives you, like when you're done with it, if you know the original language, it gives you a really nice way to like kind of compare and contrast the new technology to the one that you're familiar with. So, quick primer on ngrok. This is how I used to build Twilio apps. Maybe you built them this way too. You would write some code, and then you would pick up your phone, and you would dial a number, right? And then you would always get this message, and it would say, an application error has occurred. And you'd be like, oh no. And then you would write some more code. It's actually worse than this, right? Because I know some of you like didn't know about local tunnel or ngrok, and so you actually like there was this other step in between where you would like FTP your files to the server, right? That you had like some staging box that could receive these sort of things. And this is a really long development cycle. Even when you have like ngrok or local tunnel, like just the act of like picking up your phone and calling it is really onerous and really takes you out of the iterative feedback loop. And so when I was doing this, I kind of realized like when this is my development process, I am starting an audio signaling connection to a cellular tower, and it's being transmitted over the PSTN through multiple providers into Twilio's data center, which is making an HTTP request to like my tunnel services and then sending it through to my local service. That's a really, really expensive HTTP request. Like really expensive. This is how I build them now. I have this is the tool ngrok. You basically tell it what port your development service is running on, and it starts up a tunnel for you. And it gives you a set of public addresses, like this hexadecimal looking address, and you take that and you paste it into Twilio's account portal. And you say, I want to configure this phone number to work on this ngrok address. I don't even look at the documentation when I build these applications anymore. I actually just set this up, make a phone call, and it shows me the actual request, right? ngrok has an inspection interface where you can actually look at the requests that come across the tunnel. And so I don't look at the documentation anymore, I just look at the request. And the request here are all the parameters. I say, oh, called city. I didn't even know I could look at the called city. That's great. And at some point, when I was doing this, you know, we talked about how expensive that HTTP request was. So I was talking with Andrew, who is here, and I said, actually, wouldn't it be really cool if instead of calling that phone number, you could just like all I really wanted was the HTTP request. I didn't want the audio and signaling. I didn't want to make that really expensive. I just want to use that request over and over again. So this is what my development cycle looks like now when I build Twilio applications. There's a replay button on every request. So you generate that request once, the expensive way, and then you just replay it over and over and over until you get it exactly right, what your application is supposed to do, and then you can move on. And this drops the iteration cycle dramatically, right? So you can stay in context and focus. It turns out that ngrok is actually useful for a whole bunch of other things. The ones that I knew about at the time when I built it were mostly for people to show off things that they were building. Like, I've built some cool little application, I want to show you what it is. I don't want to deploy it, it's just running on my laptop, I want to show it off. But of course, there are other, like, it's not just Twilio that does webhooks. Like, webhooks are almost a standard part of every major API that has any sort of notification primitive for you now. So it's useful for other people. So I figured, like, oh, I'll polish it up, put a website to it, and like throw it up online. So I launched it. I like put up a little Hacker News post. And Do you know that moment, right? You guys have built things, or you like not even before you've built something, you're thinking about building something, and you're like talking to your friend. You're like, I'm thinking about this car sharing service where or this service where you could like order like a way to get around. And they go like Uber. Like no, well kind of like Lyft. Well no, it's like get around. Like you're like, oh man, this has already been done before. And so you get all like whenever you're like launching or even thinking about launching of this product, right, or this tool, right, you get like these comments like, have you heard of this other tool that does exactly what you want it to? And at that point you get really discouraged. And you're like, this has already been done before. Like why should I build it again, right? This has been invented. And this is a good thing. Don't let other people who have built applications discourage you. The fact that something already exists, it's actually a great sign because it means they've proven the market for you. It means that there is a real interest, that people are they are invested in this idea, and you don't have to convince people, right? And more than that, it gives you a model to look at what people have done and learn from what they did right and what they did wrong. It is far easier to build something, a better version of something that already exists, than to try and build something completely new and convince people that they really need it. So let's say you have built something. So I built it and I launched it, and then there comes like the point where you're like, well, what do I do next? And trying to decide like how to iterate on the product that you've already built. You can do that in multiple ways. One of the ways that I've really kind of chosen to do this is through the support channels that I run for ngrok. Most of your customers are really bad communicators. They're just not inherently as a person, like they're busy, they have other things to do. And when they run into a problem with your service, they don't want to talk to you. I know this personally. Like if I'm using one of your software services and I run into a problem, I don't want to talk to you. Talking to you is going to take minutes, hours, like it might take days, it depends on your turnaround time. But it's going to take me way longer to like get an answer than for me to try something else. So like here's an email I got from someone. This isn't the best one. I had a better example of this, but I couldn't find it. Of someone who like emailed me and was like, I'm trying to do this really convoluted thing with ngrok and it's not working. And I said, well, why didn't you do it the right way? And he was like, well, when I did it that way, it crashed. I'm like, why didn't you tell me it crashed? I want to know that it crashed. I could fix it if you told me it crashed, right? But no one wants to talk to you. Like 4 times, like this guy's talking, right? And he's like, it's crashed 4 times. And like just now, he's like telling me about it, which is frustrating. So when you get support emails, when you get any kind of communication from your customers, who are like, oh man, could your, like, this is broken, or like, could ngrok support this? You want to be thinking, the mindset that you want to take is, maybe someone else has this problem. Like maybe it's unique, but maybe someone else has this problem. But if you hear it from multiple people, you should be thinking like, oh, there are hundreds of people who have this problem, right? Because people don't want to talk to you. So when you get multiple people, like even small numbers, right, it means that the actual number of people who are running into this problem is much larger than the small cohort who are actually talking to you. This is an example of like one of those instances where I got more than one request from like customer support requests of people talking to me. I downloaded it and installed it and it popped out and nothing happened. Hey, I'm trying to use ngrok, the terminal closes before I can do anything, can you give me some help? When I try to open the exe file, command prompt opens very briefly, then nothing happens, please help. Does anyone know what's going on here? If you use Windows, you know what's going on here. This is someone double-clicking a command line application in Windows, and Windows like just opens it, and the program displays its help text too fast for you to see, and then it closes. And I got these emails all the time, and I hated getting these emails, right? These are from like, it's one of the more difficult support problems, right? Because these are people who are not particularly technically focused, right? That they're designers or something. Like ngrok has a very wide user base. So like you have to like teach people how to use a command line interface. This is an entirely huge barrier, right? So I actually iterated on technical solutions so that I wouldn't have to deal with this problem anymore. Here's one of the earlier iterations of when you double-clicked it, ngrok would detect that and tell you, this is a command line application. This is not something you're supposed to be doing, right? And that's kind of the fundamental basis of my support strategy and even the product design of ngrok, is that I do a different kind of conversion analysis. Conversion optimization problem, which is I make it as easy as possible for people to talk to me. Because remember, they don't want to talk to me. And then I make it as easy as possible and then try to optimize that conversion rate to 0. That means whatever they were trying to do, whatever a customer is trying to do with ngrok, if they have problems, that they're able to solve them themselves, right, in seconds with feedback from the application, at worst with documentation, never with waiting for me, right, for a response from me. A response from me could, if I'm giving a presentation, it's going to be at least 30 minutes. You can rely on that for some of how you think about building a product, but the other thing that you also want to do is experiment. One of this is I was working with ngrok, and you'll try things, and some will fail. Many of them will fail actually, but some of them they'll actually be really surprising. I was working with ngrok, and I thought, well, it does this for HTTP requests. That's cool. Wouldn't it be cool if I could expose SSH like this? SSH is running on my local machine, but you can't access it through a NAT. Wouldn't it be cool if you could do that? So I figured out, I'll throw it together, and here's a new command. It's a TCP. Instead, you can run TCP, and it'll tunnel traffic to port 22, and suddenly SSH is available publicly. I was oh, that's pretty cool. I don't really expect anyone to have any great use for it. And then I got this email, and someone says, we put a lot of devices out in the field, thousands, and they have a connection, a cellular connection, but it doesn't give them public IPs, and we would really like to automate these devices with ngrok to give them addresses that we could talk to and basically talk to these devices as if they were real web services, and we want to run our own custom protocol to talk to them and control them. This became an entire product just from hey, SSH would be kind of a cool thing to have. This is the product that it turned into was a product focused around the IoT marketplace of allowing people to remotely manage devices that they deploy in the field, right? With this technology that just kind of started out as an experiment. This is a production use case, right? Which, when I show you the tech stack of this is the tech stack of the original ngrok. That's one server. There's only one, with 2 or 3 services in a database. That was the entire application. And people would say, how many servers do you use to run ngrok? And I'd say, well, one. So don't rely on it for anything production. But right, I was telling you, I got to this point where I wanted to build a product that did production things. And when you do that, you can't run on one server anymore, right? You have to be able to, if you saw Peter and Oyt's talk and Bob's talk earlier about how they architect things at Twilio, you have to be able to cope with failure, right? You have to be able to scale when there are too many connections for a single box anymore. And so going into a production architecture meant changing how ngrok was built fundamentally. Right. So I re-architected it. So this was a year-long project to rebuild ngrok in a way that actually would meet those demands for production tunnels. And so, like most people are working with these days, this is a service-oriented architecture, microservices now, if you want to be cool about it. For those of you who have ever built or worked on a service-oriented architecture, Brian was kind of talking about this earlier about Kubernetes and Metasos, and everyone's I don't know, how is this going to work out? We have a whole bunch of containers, and they're running all over the place, and then you have this is a really hot space right now, where here's one example of of people who have like a virtual router and switches, and here's another one with a technology called Weave for connecting Docker containers together. And you can see the level of complexity. Orchestration of microservices and service discovery is a really difficult problem. There is no like out-of-the-box solution for this right now, and all of the solutions that people have come up with are like within the last 6 months or a year. There is a lot of alpha technology here, and it's changing very, very rapidly. And even if you get it to work, right, it's this whole other layer of things that you have to worry about and manage and invest into. So what I really wanted was I wanted to build the kind of architecture that would let me like get all of the benefits of a service-oriented architecture and microservices, but not pay this orchestration cost, right? Not have to work with alpha software, not have to deal with the huge overhead and additional complexity. So the question is, can we simplify? Can we still get those benefits, but not lose, and I mean this like very literally, without the loss of generality, okay? Without losing all of those benefits, without losing that generalization that comes with service-oriented architectures. So this is actually how ngrok works right now. There are multiple services, there are multiple servers, but you'll notice that they all look the same, right? They're like, I don't know, I have like 8 microservices or 10 services, whatever. But they all run on each box. Every box runs all of the services. When a service wants to talk to another one, it has a defined port. Every service runs on the same port on every box, and the services all talk to each other over the loopback interface. I don't have connection timeout problems. I don't have to deal with CAP theorem problems in that sense. There's no orchestration, right? All of the services run all the places. There's a single machine image. I create that and run it. I don't have to worry about scheduling all of these services. I don't even run these things in containers, okay? And what that gets you, right? Oh, sorry. So here's like kind of a visualization of what that looks like. Like the ngrok server, it talks to this auth service. It also talks to a blacklisting service. There are exceptions to that. Here's like the balancer service. The balancer service actually talks, but still you can see how you still get the same benefits out of it, where you're saying like, well, you do have to talk to multiple services, but they're always on the same port, right? It's always running on every machine on the same port in the same way. And there are additional exceptions as well, like, oh, well, I need, like, where are you going to store the data? Like, data doesn't shard particularly well in the exact same way across services. So there are exceptions for those use cases. And doing an architecture like that, you still get many of the benefits of the service-oriented architecture, but without paying the huge overhead costs. So notice that, like, I still get strict API boundaries, right? No one is going to, like, as opposed to like building this monolithic code base where you're like, we will adhere to these interfaces and that will save us from untangling the monolith at some point. You still get independence of deployments, right? I can deploy each of these services individually across all of the boxes. I get independence of process failures. If a single process, a single part of the service fails, it doesn't take down the entire application. I can still write, like, these services are not all written in the same language, right? I can use different languages for them, and I can still scale horizontally. I can keep adding additional machines that run all of these services. And one day, when all of the technology is stable and we live in the beautiful panacea of Docker everything, and the technology is ready to actually run these beautiful cloud applications, I've already architected it in that way, right? Where all of the services already communicate as if maybe they were on different boxes. So that gives you a very clear upgrade path. If you're building a new system from scratch and really want to do this service-oriented thing, this is a really easy way to start out in an architecture that gives you a straightforward path to building towards like the future of like where application development is going to go, but without paying the huge overhead costs today. One of the other things that I learned while doing this was around the language. Like I said, the project was actually originally conceived just to learn Go. Here's a thought experiment for you. I want you to pick a programming language. And then I want you to build a web application in that programming language. Just something small, just to start with. Think about it like 3 endpoints or something like that. And then I want you to make it real time. So add like a WebSocket part to it, okay? And then it needs to be fast. So it needs to be able to handle like 1,000 requests a second. And beyond that, it needs to handle like 10,000 simultaneous clients who are all connected at the same time. And then I want you to run it on like a really big box where there are like 18 cores, to run it across all of the cores. And then worse than that, imagine that you're not running it in your own data center. Imagine that you have to deploy it on someone's like laptop. So you actually need to like package up the entire thing. Like, how much work do you think that's going to be? And so a lot of people think about it and they say, well, well, some people might say that's impossible. Probably not. You usually say like, well, I need to install the JVM first. Can I do that? Or like, how do I package up the Ruby interpreter? Or that's just like, I could write it in C. It's going to be a lot of work. Like, I'm going to have to write my own C WebSocket implementation, right? Or you could choose Go. And all of those things are so good in Go already that actually building that application that I described will take you less than a day. This is a quote that I gave to the Go team on their 4th anniversary, which says, ngrok's success as a project is due in no small part to choosing Go as the implementation language. And I really do believe this. This is not true of all applications, but there is certainly a large class of applications, very network-heavy, very asynchronous, concurrent applications, for which Go is just a huge, it gives you an order of magnitude improvement over other tools when it comes to building these sorts of applications. And that's not always going to be true. It may no longer be true, but certainly when I first started ngrok, there was just no other language that actually would allow me to achieve all of those goals as rapidly as I did. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about growth. When I originally built ngrok, the goal was for when I wanted to evangelize it, I guess, it was to spread ngrok, get the word around, and to cover the cost of hosting. So I conceived it, and I made it a pay-what-you-want service. And it would kind of guilt you into paying for it. So the idea was to leverage my customers for growth. Your customers are suggestible, right? Especially if they feel bad about not paying for your product. So when you click, sorry, I can't afford it, this is what you would see. It would say, don't worry about it. Instead of paying for the service, tweet about it. Tell your friends, spread the word. Actually, and this actually works really well. I would have at least 5 tweets a day of people constantly saying oh, this is a great, you should try this, and spreading the word to their friends. You should actually leverage everyone for growth. People who pay for your product, they're actually really invested in it. If they decided to whip out their wallets and pay for it, they really like it, so they'll probably tweet about it too. So after you pay, it would essentially tell you to do the same thing, right? And that got additional. It's really great. Of course, they didn't know that. So what started as an exercise to learn a language, it actually turned into a full-time business. This is what I do full-time now as of 2 weeks ago, with over 40,000 developers. It's just mind-blowing from just this thing that I had initially conceived of as a side project. Last thing I want to leave you with, I pronounce it ngrok. I've heard a lot of people call it very many other names. ngrok, I think, is my favorite. It's the IPA notation. And so I would look at Twitter and look for people who are talking about it, and I would always see certainly people would talk about it in other languages, but they would also I saw this different class of tweet and people saying ngrok, which is a fairly unique name, but definitely not talking about software. And I was what does that mean? I have no idea what this means, and it's not my favorite association. But apparently, in some language or transliteration, I actually don't know what this is. So if any of you know what language this is, it actually means snore. So this is, if you go on YouTube, you can actually find videos of people snoring, and it's ngrok. I don't know. Anyways, Thank you very much. Follow me on Twitter. I am @inconceivable.